Welcome back to the Changemaker podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. Today, my guest is Katy Byrne. Katy is an author, psychotherapist. She has an audiobook called The Power of Being Heard. She is a columnist for the Sonoma Sun, formerly radio producer and host of KSVY, KVON Sonoma, California, north of San Francisco. And she currently has out a book, which I think is very timely, Conflict to Communication, Lessons from Life and My Therapy Office. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Katy Byrne.
Welcome to the Changemaker podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
Katy, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here, Deke. I was going to show people not to be all about selling anything, but just so you could see. Just so sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think, this conversation is very timely. And we touched before beginning the interview. It's really, we live in conflicted times, right? You look politically in the U.S., you look across the globe, wars and everything. And so, you've spent your life, basically being a therapist and resolving conflicts. What is your take of what's going on in the world at this point?
Well, that's the question. That's the big elephant in the living room. Deke, and again, thank you for having me on today. This is this book poured out of me after over 40 years of being a psychotherapist and watching the divides and the terror and the school shootings and the constant daily wars, the killing of children, the terrible things going on in this world, and then going from the news at night to my therapy office during the day and watching people come in really upset, going through their own broken relationships and their own divides in their families, and coming to me to try to help repair those all the anger, all the resentment. I had a father coming with his daughter, and after a while, after they opened up, she was crying and he was sobbing, and they were realizing all the beliefs they had formed. They had quit talking to each other for 2 years. The terrible pain I saw between mothers and daughters and in couples but the difference was that in my office, I saw people, they did not do the two things I think the world does is we either go into what I call the ostrich thing. We pretend nobody knows. We pretend nobody sees us. We hide all of what we feel. We numb out. We act like we're happy when we're not. And that numbing and also the anger that we project onto, we blame everybody. Of course, you know this stuff. I know from watching your podcasts. So we blame and we do all these things. So we have an inner terrorist. We have an inner little child that wants to belong. So we join gangs. But the bottom line is that I'm watching these people. Even during the pandemic, I had clients in the ICU who are nurses, and I'm watching. My eyes are bugging out of my head, just like they are right now. I'm in front of the Zoom screen, listening to these clients in all this pain, wanting to go. They didn't want to be broken up with their partner, and so what I saw that was different in my office that needs to happen more in the world was robust transparency. And that's not going to be an easy shift into the world, but I want to talk more about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can just speaking from the political perspective, and it's not, I mean, the conflict in politics are not just in elected politics. They're at the workplace, they're in families and everything. But it seems like just as we're conversing here, I thought, to address an issue, you first need to admit that you have an issue. And politically, there's not a lot of humility or taking responsibility and go, okay, like marriage counseling, maybe we need counseling for our politicians to come together and say, maybe that's better than a debate, but to go, okay, we're both part of the problem. Let's sit down with this counselor and maybe we can fix our problem. But just to constantly just say, blaming, as you say, well, the other side is the root of all of our issues. And having been in counseling, if somebody says, well, my partner's totally to blame, I'm blameless in this, that's probably not going to get a really good end result.
Well, I appreciate your description. I don't think it's just the willingness that people have that helps them repair in therapy. I think what has to happen politically and in every other arena is a new value system, a new infrastructure. It's kind of what you're alluding to,
Yeah.
that values and includes what I call kind of a scaffolding, so that you encourage people to say I statements, what you think, what you feel, what your beliefs are, so you get to know your politician, not just who the person is blaming, and you you encourage them to sweat through what I call gutsy conversations that are exactly what you're saying, Deke. They're not debate, they're conversations. The thing I constantly have to slow my clients down with, they'll start asking questions. Why did you bring the baby's milk home when I asked you to bring home, apples? And the questions are a court of law approach. They
Yeah.
sound like, why did you? Instead of, I felt hurt because I was waiting for the baby's milk. So there's a whole way of helping people speak that has to be embedded in our systems.
I love that you said that establishing a new framework and a new value system, because that is really what it's going to take. Because so I was a candidate in 3 campaigns here in Augusta for mayor. By being positive, inclusive, uplifting, bringing people together on common ground, I won those with an average of 62% of the vote. So then I just ran a political campaign to pass a ballot referendum. Same thing. It was positive, uplifting, just bringing people together on common ground. It passed with 74% of the vote. So the focus of those campaigns was to inform and engage, but typical politics is basically like to inflame and enrage. And so how do you shift the paradigm from inform and engage to inflame? I mean, away from inflame and engage and enrage to inform and engage. It's a task but I think it's mainly got to be if somehow we get the leaders that are doing that or that are making it all right because it wins elections or it gets me ahead in business.
Well, I'm touched by what you're describing because you've been in the political arena, which I can't frankly even. I was asked to
I'm a
be
glutton for
involved with
punishment.
city council, and I thought I don't know if I had the patience.
No,
Yeah.
but I think that's the thing is that, and I want to get your perspective on this. To me, we say, well, change is scary. People don't want to change. So I've really started using, no, we're evolving. Let's look at it that way. We're evolving. It's not necessarily changing our core values, but we need to I mean, the world changes and we need to evolve with what's going on in the world around us.
Right. That's one of the things I talk about is the terrible need for the evolution of the species. We
Yeah.
are still, and I know you interviewed Brian Kloss, and he's so interesting on the way we are still operating like the caveman.
Yeah.
The anthropological beginnings. The amygdala brain is still fight, flight, trigger, get the gun, and you're right. To change that kind of thinking and that kind of system, it's going to take. One of the things it will take is a strong intention, and that's something you can bring as a leader to as a government official. You can constantly repeat in every conversation: can we accomplish cooperation here? Can we accomplish listening to each other? David Brooks, the wonderful journalist, uh, said in his last book, when another person is talking, you want to be listening so actively that you're practically burning calories.
Yeah. No, I love that.
Isn't that
But
cute?
that is, but it's so much of this to me. And I was, somebody sent me something from C.F. Lewis that said, if you have these certain traits, you've got a special anointing on you. And it was really, I mean, it was very eye opening for me. But so much of this seems so simple to me. It's like I'm a huge Martin Luther King Jr. fan. I mean, he's one of my heroes, but a simple statement: darkness cannot overcome darkness, only light can do that. Hate can't overcome hate, only love can do that. And I'm like, that's very simple at its origins, but it's so simply true. There's not, I mean, it's almost like we, as a society, politically, a lot of other things, we're just throwing more darkness at darkness. And it's like, I'm sorry, that's not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, I like the emphasis of what you're saying because I was just working with a couple of families this week, and I asked the couple, what is working in the therapy? What are you finding is helpful? Because the longer I work, the more interested I am. What really does work here? What's different about this conversation? And he said, I, in 30 years of marriage, I didn't know that I really wasn't talking with my wife. I didn't know that I really didn't hear her. I didn't understand. And I said, yeah, because you're a man and your conditioning is to shoot the buffalo. It's all, I got the carburetor fixed, honey. Have a nice evening. An entrenched, uh, indoctrination. I'm not anti-males. They're my favorite people, but I've been reading this morning from this incredible study. It's a book by Milburn and Conrad called Raised to Rage. And it describes how young boys in particular, they just want to be loved by their fathers. They want to be included. They want to belong. And they learn authoritarianism growing up because that's what, for generations, parents were supposed to do. And that then they mimic that, they become authorities, and they don't learn the nuances of real connection. So the divorce rate's over 60%.
Well, you know what? It's interesting to me. A friend made a point a number of years ago with me that said people mistakenly consider what the alpha in a wolf pack is. That people think it's, the alpha is the macho and everything. The alpha is there to protect the rest of the pack. It's the alpha is the protector. And so that's the way I view, if I'm going to, I don't view myself as, oh, I'm the alpha male. But if there was a way to define it that, okay, I'm the protector of my family. When I was in office, I was there to protect and look out for the best interests of my people. And so I think that in a way is seeing the alpha not as the strong man, but as the protector and the leader, you know, modeling the behavior for the younger members of the pack. I think that's sort of a paradigm shift on maybe, man, we're making breakthroughs here. That's a paradigm shift on masculinity. How about that? We just came up with it.
Well, a part of the reason I wanted to be on your broadcast is I love your demeanor and you seem so authentic and real. And I can sense that you bring to an environment that kind of genuine wish for, collaboration. But it's very, very rare still, Deke, in this world. And we are in bed with war. We are embedded with, we've concretized. You were talking about your throat issues, and I think a lot about physical and emotional issues. We are literally on guard. We are triggered all the time. A car gets on your bumper behind you. Somebody cuts in your line in the grocery store. So we're triggered and we don't really understand what that's about. We haven't even begun to understand. It's really about unmet needs, about wanting to be treated fairly. Anyway, yeah.
No, no, Katie, it's funny. It's just, and I don't need to quite figure it out, but I realize I'm wired differently. So when I got my diagnosis, I had a sense of peace and calm. And so I love grassroots engagement. So I enjoyed going through chemotherapy, if anybody can say that. But it was actually the connection with people when you're sitting in a room getting chemotherapy for 4.5 hours, everybody's on equal level. And so you get to, I mean, it's people at their most vulnerable that are able to have these conversations across all lines of difference, which is a beautiful thing. But it does, in order to have those real conversations, we have to make ourselves vulnerable. And to me, vulnerability is a strength. It's not a weakness. I mean, to get up, for me to get up and speak to thousands of people and just, here I am, I'm not going to try to put on another face, and because that takes more energy to try to hide yourself. But I think to present your real self, to me, that's more strength and a lot of people say it's weakness. And I think it's, as you say, it's fear that if I open myself up, then I can be wounded. I can be attacked, and I don't want to be hurt. So, but it's so freeing if you can kind of go, okay, I'll take the leap and I'll open myself up.
Deke, I mean this deeply. In my experience, you're one of the few men that feel that way, and I really want to propel you to model this more and more, because with my male clients, they'll often say to me, I don't know what you mean, talk about my feelings. And they'll say something like, I was perplexed. And the wife will say, that's a feeling. And he'll go, well, I don't know what you want from me. So, but I think to your point, fear is the big elephant, the other big elephant in the room, that the brain literally shuts down in the large part of the emotional part of the brain when there's fear. And there's fear for women too, for all genders. There's so much shame about our feelings in this culture. I have a lot of energy on. I want to say something about that too. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, but it's funny, and I've said on here so many times. So, Katie, I was born in Montreal, Canada. I moved to Augusta as an incredibly shy 4-year-old, with a thick Canadian accent. So I knew what it was like to feel like the outsider, the other. But it's made me spend my whole life. I don't want to make people feel like they fit in, because you might have to compromise yourself to fit into a clique. I want people to understand, to make them feel like they belong, and we're all faulted. There's no perfect person. And I'm like, but that creating in people a sense of a belonging is something that's always been just really, really important to me.
Well, you're very fortunate, and we are very fortunate to have you. And I hope you'll talk about that more, even with other men on your show, because I tell my clients I don't even have a video to tell you to watch. I mean, I made a couple myself with clients and put them on my website, but even that was a struggle because the young man couldn't identify his feelings. There's a line from Terrence Real's book. Terrence Real has written a book called "I Don't Want to Talk About It," and he only works with men. I mean, he works with families and too, but he has this line. He said, "Sons don't want their father's balls; they want their hearts."
That's very profound. But I've always said, so my dad was my true north. So he flew B-17 bombers in World War II at 18 years old. He had grown up on a farm in Virginia, lost his father when he was 12 years old. He was raised by a single mother during the Great Depression, one of 5 siblings, and she was a school teacher, but she instilled the value of education. But I've always said, to me, to be a great man, you've got to be a good man first. And my dad was a good man. And so I was raised, I'm like, despite what, and I do try to teach young men this, I'm like, being a gentleman and being kind and being compassionate, those are all wonderful character traits for a man to have. I mean, that is to me, what being a leader is about as well. And I think society, particularly politically, so has held up the strong man, that if you use fear and intimidation to get your desired outcome, that's bullying. That's not leadership. Leadership is making people feel safe, secure, included, and protected, and that their voices are being heard. And that to me there is nothing milk toast or namby-pamby. I take that very seriously. And my family, so my oldest brother, I'm the youngest of 5 children. My oldest brother was 21 years older than me, but he passed at the age of 70. And so I've got 12 great nieces and nephews who, I don't have any children myself. We just had the 12th, who lives in Brooklyn, who we're going up for his christening this weekend. But I call him Deke's dozen. But I purposely try to model for those 12 children what a good character looks like. And I'm like, I told the 2 oldest, who are both 15 now, I said, I just went on the board of the forward party. The young forwardists are the on-campus proxy. 5 kids and teenagers in bedrooms across the U.S. formed this. They're so politically active. But I made the oldest, I'm like, you 2 are the leaders of the next generation. So Michael and Caroline, but I'm like, you need to take that seriously. Your cousins, you at the top of the scale, you are to protect them. You are to lead them. But in order for me to ask them to do that, I've got to model for them what that looks like.
Yeah, kids learn that they'll just do what they see, not what they're told. And it's so powerful what you're saying, because this thing is so profound. This caveman mentality, this terrible destruction, the kids being murdered and killed, and the young women being raped, and the destruction that comes from the shame underneath this, which is, I can't tell anybody. Emotions have to have somewhere to go. And if you can't say to your wife or your kid, I'm anxious about being on radio tonight, or I'm a little bit nervous about the climate tonight. We've got fire threats in the neighborhood, if you can't share, if you can't really talk to your wife, then you're putting up a wall like a border. And I want to say another thing. And you're putting up a wall in your body. That's
Yeah.
the other thing. You get. I believe we get more illness. We get bad backs. We get migraines. We get all kinds of problems because we are holding in a lot that needs to come out. I joke about I learned the most from my cat because he has hairballs. Because they have feelings, right?
Yeah.
They get them out, then they're fine. But there's a line from a wonderful book I like by Dana Jack, and it's called Silencing the Self. And she says, when dialogue dies, as it can with either person's failure to speak, to hear, or to acknowledge the other, then part of the self also dies. We are very deadened in our bodies. And what happens when we don't really share and talk with each other is there's no circulation, there's no movement, there's no connection.
Oh my gosh. I mean, Katy, through all this experience, I was diagnosed April 19th of 2003. But the people that I have met from all walks of life, from all over the place, I didn't have to get surgery at MD Anderson, but I go down there regularly to get checked out to Houston. But this has allowed me to intersect with so many different people's lives, and I pray for them all individually every day. Everybody that I've met along the way. Doctors, nurses, the administration, patients, but it's just, to me, to have that web of connection, but to also, so a young lady, Meredith Guidry, who I was a mentor for Leadership Augusta a number of years ago. So I met Meredith and we hit it off. Wonderful young lady. She's 38, 39 years old, but she had her second child last year and then found out she had a rare form of ovarian cancer. So she went to MD Anderson, and on her way back, she called me and said, tell me about MD Anderson. She told me about her situation. But so she was out there at the beginning of this week. Scans are negative again, thank God. But I check in on her regularly and along with my wife. But she said, it's so nice because, when you first get cancer, it's everybody's checking in on you and everything. But as you go through time, that kind of falls to the wayside and you can feel this sense of loneliness. But to have had that experience, and now I've got these people that I check in on regularly. But that's part of that being the alpha male. I'm there to protect them. I'm there to encourage them. I'm there to uplift them because I can understand that it does feel lonely. And I tell people, cancer is a common ground issue. It should build a bridge of empathy because I don't know anybody that has not experienced it, whether it be themselves, family member, friend. We've all experienced cancer. So can we just talk about that? I know it's scary and certain people don't want to talk about it. I love to talk about it because I can encourage other people.
Well, it's really important that you talk about it, not only for your physical body to be relieved of having to hold in all that truth about your life, but also the thing is that's so tricky is if we have secrets or if we try to keep guarding ourselves, putting up shields, I call it the National Guard is the same as the personal guard. We keep putting up boundaries and walls. If you can't share that, then we don't even become aware as a species that we need to have cancer research given more budget.
Yeah.
If we pretend it's not happening, we do the ostrich thing, then there is no cancer.
No, and that's the thing to me is that I've always found I'm more than willing to open up. And if you're willing to open up, it makes it safe for other people to open up. But I had my first year in office, so I ran in 2005 to fulfill an unexpired term. So I had to run again in 2006. So that was an election year too. My first year in office, I go to speak to a Christian alternative school. So it's troubled Christian teenagers. And I never script any speech I've ever done or anything. But so there are parents in the room, and one kid, I go, ask me anything. First question I got, have you ever done drugs? And I said, you know what? I wish I could say no, but I'm not going to lie to you. But I said, but I will tell you, I had so many friends at the University of Georgia that were so bright, had such good futures ahead of them, who I saw their lives ruined through drugs. And I said, I can guarantee you, I have never seen any happiness derived from long-term drug use in anybody. So I wish I could say no, but I'm not gonna. But after that, the parents came up to me and they're like, thank you for being so honest with our children. And for a politician to say that with parents in an election year, but I called my wife, I'm like, it was just so freeing to actually be honest rather than saying I didn't inhale or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big deal. It sounds so simple. Oh, just be honest, be authentic. I had a client the other day. He's been struggling with a marriage for 40 years and wants to keep the marriage and, has addictions. One of them is sex addiction, and it's terribly painful for the marriage. And
Oh my gosh, I
we
can only
can't. We're
imagine.
having, and so he's numbed out, and we tried everything to get to what's going on, what's at the bottom of this. And finally, the other day, he just screamed out. He said, I told my mother I never ever wanted to be ever shamed again. I was never going to be put down in the high school. I was never going to be told I wasn't. I was going to be strong, and I was going to prove I was enough. And he blocked off all the years of being shamed as a kid, kicked out of school. The kids beat him up. He had terrible moments, and he completely compartmentalized it and just said to himself, well, I'm just going to have pretty little blondes on my arm, and nobody's going to think less of me. I'm going to be the big cock in the chicken coop. And that's what caused his sex addiction. It wasn't anything about anything to do with sex. It wasn't even pleasurable. It was more, I'm okay now.
Yeah.
That's the power of this stuff. This is the repair that needs to happen. And these guys get together and talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, feel free to use this interview and tell them to give me a call,
I
but
will
it
be
is,
actually.
but it is, I think so much of ego is driven by insecurity, that being an example. So, I might be insecure, but I'm going to show everybody I can have young blondes on my arm. And it's like, but if you're not comfortable with yourself, that you've got to compensate in some way. And that's what I see with a lot of guys that, it's like, I've got something to prove. I'm more of a man than you and everything. And I'm like, that's just insecurity. I won't get into, trying to psychoanalyze our former president by any means, because that would be a tough one. But I'm like, but I think it's for the young men in my family and the young ladies too, I want to show them what it's like to be a person of good character and to be compassionate. So I had conversations with people 2 weeks ago, one in Oregon, a lady who's a friend of mine up there, one in Austin, a young man who's an author friend of mine in Austin, and then a lady who's a friend of mine here in Augusta. And every one of those conversations ended with, it all comes back to love. I mean, three people, different ages, different genders in different states. And that was not scripted. That was how those conversations ended. But I will tell you this. So I focused on leading through love and compassion for 9 years. So I still, my bond with the people I serve is still there. They rallied around me when I had announced I had cancer. But so I'm about to start working with a young lady. Her name is Peaches Barnes. she's about to be the mayor of Florence, South Carolina. So her brother was the president of our local HBCU. And so he said as soon as she won the Democratic primary, she's got no Republican competition in November. He said, the first thing you need to do is bring Deke on as an advisor and use him for your first 4 years in office. So she's also a minister. But we had our first conversation. She's coming over in about a week to spend a day with me. But she said, when I talk about leading my city through love, people look at me like I've got two heads. I'm like, no, no, no. I'm like, I have got the case study to show why in leadership positions, fear and intimidation, and you're forgotten. You lead through love and compassion, and that bond with the people you serve is still there. So I'm like, now I have somebody else I can show and teach that to. And I mean, it's cool when, you can share that stuff. I mean, and there's nothing, like I say, it's harder to lead that way than it is through fear and intimidation. It is harder to hold your tongue with patience, dealing with other elected officials and not release it in anger. And I'm super competitive, and I'm like, people want to get under your skin and they want to get in your head. They want a reaction. And I'm like, I'm not going to give them what they want. So, but it takes much more strength and discipline to lead in that way.
Well, I want to see something about that I feel about, the whole thing about hairballs, emotional hairball, the idea of getting something out, the congestion that's inside. I think the idea of managing our impulses and regulating our anger is absolutely correct. And I do work with clients, of course, in that regard. And I think it needs to be put into the infrastructure of political conversations too, that there not be blaming and so much putting down everybody. But you're right. In the long run, we have to manage those impulses to claw at somebody or shoot them. But I think that what's more important, even, Deke, is to understand that when we're angry, there's something under that. There's an unmet need. There's a longing. There's a communication that needs to be, that we need to learn to have the courage to have these crucial conversations, to have what I call gutsy conversations. So rather than control my anger, it's also a courageous act to say, I'm afraid that you're not going to pay the rent, and I need that to pay my mortgage. And rather than saying, you're what, because you're late on rent, and to be able to talk to each other about, I have a need, to feel cherished. I wish once in a while you'd give me a compliment. To say that to your partner rather than, ignore it. I gave up on that, or being angry over the groceries.
No. And I mean, every relationship is founded upon trust. And that is during my time in office, I never violated the public trust because that was important to me. And, it's like with any relationship, it's once you've broken the trust, it's hard to repair it. But it also everything takes work. So my mom and dad were married when he was 21 and she was 20 years old. He had just come home from World War II. I think it was a shotgun wedding, but don't tell anybody that. They're both gone now. But my mom would say, she would leave my dad and go stay with her parents' house. At her parents' house, I mean, they're in their early 20s. She said, but I always came back. So they were married for well over 40 years, 5 kids, 11 grandkids, now 12 great grandkids. But I'm like, in today's world, we've almost made things, throwing away relationships, too easy. And it's really, I mean, I've been married for 25 years. It's still a work in progress, and we've still got to work at it.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's a wonderful line from, Eric Fromm, in his book, The Art of Loving. The first paragraph says, if you want an easy way to learn how to love, forget this book. Don't even read
Yeah.
it, because love takes discipline. It takes hard work. It's not any different than learning to play the guitar. You know, yeah.
No, and we are, I mean, I'm constantly evolving, but I will tell you, I mean, I'm no fan of President Trump. I mean, I'm apolitical. I'm not Democrat or Republican. But after the assassination attempt, I saw Lindsey Graham, who I actually know, on one of the morning shows, and I mean, he was emotional and he wasn't faking it. But he said, he's a grandfather, he has kids and everything. And I'm like, I am going to try. I don't know him personally. I'm like, but I'm going to try not to judge until I can actually meet somebody. And I'm going to try to find the humanity in even the most unlikable people. There's got to be something there that's decent. If we look for it, I'm sure there are totally, completely evil people, but I'm like, that takes work to try to find stuff in people you don't particularly care for, but still be able to have a conversation and still seek that common ground. You know, so that for me was kind of a revelation. I'm 56 years old, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to purposely, intentionally try to, if I'm off put by somebody when I meet them, I'm going to try to go deeper and find at least something we have in common.
Yeah, you're making me, what I'm thinking about is, a number of things. One of the things I talk about is, all of us look out at the world and we say, why is this, like the way you started the interview? How could the world be in this state where these children are being massacred, and we don't even actually know how to handle this terrible heating up of the earth, and all the suffering of the animals, all the things going on around us. How could this be happening? We have all this intelligence, we have technology, and one of the things I say a lot is the heroes are us.
Yeah.
And you're demonstrating that today. You are being heroic by sharing your truth, by talking about yourself. And that is very rare for men. One of the things we've all heard before, but sometimes my clients haven't heard it, is they'll say, well, why does talking to each other, why does that help so much? And I'll say, because intimacy is into me, you see.
Yeah.
So that's how you get close. And but the thing is, the other thing about this is, let's not minimize the power and the difficulty, the challenge of this, and the courage it takes, Deke. You make it sound, oh well, you grew up this way, you're kind of, it's more comfortable for you, and I'm sure it is for some very few men. But most of us are entrenched in this thing I call the tyranny of positivity. And that was something that Susan David, Harvard Medical School psychologist, refers to in her book, in the book by Susan Cain called Bittersweet. But she says, um, the tyranny of positivity we all have to have on the smiley face is what I say. She says, if you can't help it, then for goodness sake, if you have to cry at work, for goodness sake, do it quietly in a bathroom stall. She mentions wearing a public smile and vomiting up ice cream in private.
Yeah.
That's
That's
the
not,
way it is, Deke. It's not the way you're describing your life. This is the way the world is. We are shut off. And this is why you get the Tutsis killing their next door neighbors in Rwanda, in the terrible, this is beyond even killing. This is torture and brutality. And this is tribal violence that happens still in our world.
well, but for me, there's so much that we worry about that we can have no effect on. I'm like, but for me to plug in with these young Fordists, these teenagers and early 20 somethings that aren't jaded with regard to politics yet, and to model for them that behavior and say you can be successful in politics doing it a different way. That's the best thing to me is I'm like, I'm 56 years old, but if I can model for them and they can model for somebody else, then I'm making a difference. And part of that is defining what I think it is. I mean, to be a public servant, but also what it is to be a man.
Well, the other thing about this, I think it's interesting how I love this conversation because I think we're kind of playing off your being so open about what it is to be a man and your authentic self. And I'm bringing forth the other side of this, which is the shadow of
Yeah.
it and the dark side, which we all see every day.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we know we're threatened by it. And I guess what I want to say is, what happens with conflict, why we don't want to enter really difficult dialogue and really get repair in these terrible situations. I work with families all the time. They haven't spoken to each other for 2 or 3 years because of differences, and they don't know how to talk through conflict. And the thing is that part of my book started with when I realized, when my mother, I'm going to be personal too now, when my mother committed suicide, that was one of the very beginnings of the book. And I realized after that happened, and we had been very, very close, that I had done what I call have a boundary. I had detached from her because I had learned boundaries are good, right? We're going to put borders up at the wall. We're going to put walls up in front of our condominiums. We're going to put high fences up in front of our apartment buildings and lock them. And I had put up a boundary, which I say in the book, boundaries are a substitute for soul. I had said, why bother talking to her? She's too difficult. Pick your battles. I had learned in some therapies, you can't change other people. All these beliefs we all carry, right? That you can't change other people. And so I had that terrible loss in front of me, and I had to look at, why didn't I say to her, Mom, I get scared with your emphysema. I get scared because you're angry all the time. I'm afraid of your anger, and I don't know how to act around you. She would have been able to hear that. I know my mother could have heard that. I felt like I can't say that. I'm a therapist. I'm supposed to be strong. And I know one of the reasons she probably did that is because she felt like a burden. She couldn't say to me, I don't want to keep calling you to come up here to get me in the ambulance. And, so we couldn't have that conversation. So please, everybody out there, it's courageous. It's not easy. You sweat when you talk to your neighbor about something like the fence blew down between your 2 yards. You're going to sweat. But you don't have to say, "Arr, arr, arr." You can say, I really don't want to spend a lot of money. Can we work this out?
Well, and I'll say, and we're getting close to being out of time here, but I lost my mother to cancer a week after my 25th birthday, and I lost my first wife to suicide when I was 29 years old.
Whoa.
And so, but I use that experience and I talk about it regularly because particularly mental illness, if you don't open up about it, it's so particular suicide, such a stigma, but I'm like, we're not going to do anything about it if we don't have these conversations. So I applaud you for bringing that out, but that's what we've just done today is we've really opened up to each other, which I think is extremely healthy. And, I hope you've got some footage that you can show to some of your patients and go, it's not easy. And I know I'm an unusual cat, but at least, but we're all in this together, and the faster we see that, that we're all connected, whether we like it or not. So that's my prayer, is that we can all realize that and try to work together, because if we don't try to do anything about these big picture issues, they're not going away. But I'm kind of like, we'll start with what's right outside your front door. If you've got a neighbor you've got a problem with, at least try to heal that relationship. And if we all start small, it can get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, and that's one theory that I value so much. And actually, it's one of the things in my book. I call it radical reaching out.
Yep.
And if we all do that every day, if we mend a divide, if we call somebody we haven't talked to for 5 years, if we help the neighbor, that's mending the fabric of our society. That's mending the holes that exist between us. It's constant how much we have to interact and be in conversation. But the other thing is we need to teach in the schools. The money needs to, all our money, so much of it goes to guns, to bombs. We fight with our money. And instead of it going to education about this, so the children from the very early on, they learn what is at the root of anger. How do you talk to somebody respectfully when you're upset? What's the history of war? And can we have that instead of guns in the schools? Like, who is suggesting that we just have some policeman at the door now with a gun to protect the kids? We don't need more of that. We may have to, but we need more of what we're talking about here, being able to be real with each other. That is how change happens. But it's not even that simple. You have to be a very good listener. You also have to make I statements, because if you say you didn't pick up the garbage in front of the house last week and it really bothers me, instead of I was worried about the garbage out there. Is it possible you could pick up your beer bottles? My neighbor the other day, when I asked him about it, he said, I was a little apologetic and he said, well, you have every right. That's your property. I will tell my kids not to drop their beer bottles out there. He was so nice. There's a lot that has to change in how people speak to each other. One of the things I find all the time with the families and the couples I work with is they'll say, well, I'll say, okay, we're done with therapy. What helped you? Because I'm really curious. I don't know. I try everything I know, and I know a lot, but I never know what really makes change happen. And they'll say, you gave me rules for war. One of my clients said that phrase. I laughed, He said, you gave me rules for war. I said, what do you mean? He said, slow down, listen, reflect back what I'm hearing, ask them, did I get it right? Did I hear you right? Because we only hear 25% or something of what other people say. And take the time for that. A lot of families are so busy now making a living, they don't even have an hour a week to sit down and hear each other.
Well, we could talk for hours, and probably will, because you'll probably come back on. But
I hope so.
As we get to the end, I ask these two questions. So where can people find you, Katy?
Conversationswithkaty.com, or Katy Byrne, as here spelled, katybyrne.com, KATYB as in boy, YRNE.com, or conversationswithkaty.com. I'm all over the place. You'll find me.
So the last question, on a daily basis, what puts a smile on your face and brings joy to your heart?
Animals, and when people are friendly and they smile and they ask how I'm doing, and there's a feeling of connection.
Well, I will tell you, Katy, I'm glad we finally got to make that connection. Thank you for being a great guest, and thank you for being with me today.
Thank you, Deke. Hope so.
All righty, that's all the time we got. Dropping the mic, and we are out.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to or watching the Changemaker podcast today. Greatly appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to see the video, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Deke Copenhaver. That's pretty easy to remember, I would think. But really, we also want to remind you to like, subscribe, rate across all platforms, download. And if you're looking for a coach, a speaker, or anything, you know where to find me. Just email me at me@dekecopenhaver.com. And thanks so much for listening.